Hello, hello, everybody. Thank you. Oh, we've got special people here. Everybody's special. Good afternoon, and welcome to a very special edition of Book Passages Events Programming. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. Today's is a panel event in honor of Women's History Month and featuring four uniquely talented, dynamic authors and agents of change. As mentioned, I'm your host, Paula Farmer. I host events here. I organize some special panel events around social justice and diversity. Case in point today. And I'm so happy to be here and that people showed up. Love to have people online as well. I'm so glad that we did this as a hybrid. The panelists have friends and fans and family all over the place, and we can have people from all over the world. Also, if you don't get to watch this live in person or live online, we will have a link available where you can share it, and it'll be on the YouTube Book Passage site forever. For better or worse, we'll find out. Maybe not. Maybe not. No, no, positive, positive. So I said this is a special event, not just because of the format of being a panel of speakers, but also because I haven't organized one of these events in person at Corte Madera since the pre-pandemic.
Wow.
So yay to kind of getting them back up and going. We did one last year, but it was at our Ferry Building location, which was appropriate for Pride panel. But I'm so glad to kind of kick off a lovely panel event, a dynamic one here for Corte Madera store. We do appreciate you supporting events like this, live, online, or in person. It really does a lot for Book Passage. We are your local independent bookstore. We contribute to the community just by being independent and local. And also, our authors love when you support their books. And this is a great opportunity to do that. So, thank you for all your support, however you do it. So, also, I want you to know we do have the books of all the authors. We'll have them available after the event for purchasing and getting them signed and personalized. But for now, I kind of want to glean from them their expertise and the impact that they have on the literary landscape, which I think all of them do in very different and wonderful ways. The panel is made up of authors of diverse backgrounds in writing, different genres. We will discuss, among many things, the importance of women's voices, women's stories, and in the still male dominated literary landscape. With that, I'd like to introduce each one of them. And this is in alphabetical order because that's how it should be. Uh, Margo Candela, raise your hand so everybody knows who you are. Yay! Margo was born and raised in Los Angeles and began her writing career when she joined the student newspaper. She eventually became a journalism major in San Francisco and began writing for websites and magazines before writing her first two novels. She eventually made her way back to the Bay Area, and The Neapolitan Sisters is her fifth novel, and it's a novel she wrote after a 10-year hiatus from writing. So that's interesting. Linda Gonzalez, raise your hand. Linda. Linda is a bilingual life and writing coach, author, and business strategist with expertise in facilitating and building sustainable solutions for diverse participants in nonprofit, social justice, educational, and philanthropic areas. She has not one but two books: The Cost of Our Lives, a memoir. Really, it's about Linda, but she does it in the setting of family dynamics and kind of a family saga. It's wonderful. One of the best I've ever read. And her most recent book is Breaking Through Your Own Glass Ceiling. This is a unique and dynamic career development and self care book that focuses on BIPOC women and debunks the one size fits all approach to those themes. Next up, Anita Gail Jones. Yay, friend of the store, definitely. Anita is a visual artist and writer who lives in Marin, but she was born and raised in Albany, Georgia. And it's from her roots that she actually wrote her debut novel, which just came out last August, I believe. It's called The Peach Seed. It's a sweeping, multi generational novel showing the origins of one South Georgia family's tradition and how its modern day sons and daughters navigate the legacies of America's civil rights movement and the impacts of enslavement. An earlier version was a novella, was selected as a 2021 top 10 finalist in the Penn Bellwether Prize for socially engaged fiction. Last but definitely not least, Priscilla Wathington. Wathington, I'm sorry. Priscilla is a Palestinian American poet, writer, and human rights advocate. Her poems and other writings have appeared in Gulf Coast, Michigan Quarterly Review, and many more publications. Her debut chapbook, Paper and Stick, explores the way language shadows atrocities. Priscilla inspires other writers to express their passions and activisms through words. She lives in San Francisco Bay Area. In fact, I think she traveled the longest to get here. So thank you. So big round of applause for all the panel. Thank you. So let's get started. We got a lot to talk about. All right. I want to know, let's start off, since you're all writers, two nonfiction, two fiction writers, but you all have unique personal story of how you got to where you are. And I want you to, I know it's asking to a lot to kind of consolidate that, but I want each of you to tell us kind of your personal writing journey, how you got to what you're doing now. And I'm going to just start with you, Margo.
Well, I was lucky enough to have two older sisters that took me and my younger sister to the library. So right there, the foundation for a love of reading was established. I come from a working class family. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, and becoming a writer was not in the realm of possibility. But I found out at one point that newspaper jobs were unionized, and I could slide into having a writing career that way. And I sold it that way to my parents. I sold it that way to myself. Didn't end up joining a newspaper. Ended up during the first .com boom, writing for websites and magazines. And then that ended, and I had a 3-month-old and no job. So I raised him exclusively for 3 years. It took 3 years when he was in preschool, and wrote two novels, got an agent, got a publisher, and managed to keep the whole con going this long. So that's how I did it.
That's great. Priscilla?
Inspiring. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a journey that can be sort of like easily distilled, but I will say that I'm over 40 and I'm getting my MFA now. So that will give you a clue. And also, I say that as a word of encouragement because it is never too late to start investing in your true self, the self that you have wanted to be, that you have been trying to be. So I have been at writing informally, formally for many, many years, but right now represents a time where I'm really making a much more substantial space in my life and investment, and able to do it now. So yeah, shout out to low residency MFA programs making that possible for me.
Absolutely. And Anita, I mentioned in the introduction that your debut was just a few months ago, although you are coming close up to your first year. Um, but it kind of blurs, the Peach Seed kind of, to me, blurs the lines of fiction, historical fiction, literary fiction, family saga. And at the same time, it's very intimate, even though it's not about your family personally, it's very intimate. So I'm curious how, and Priscilla feels old or something and saying she's starting late, but this is your debut, and yeah, exactly. So share yours. Yeah,
And be encouraging too.
yeah.
Yeah, well, growing up in a house with a mother who was a school librarian and sixth grade teacher, and a father who was a lard renderer, meaning he worked at a meat packing plant and rendered lard. Education was just a given. You were going to go to college and you were going to do things. So I was very grateful for my parents, for supporting the artist. Not necessarily something that people do, because go get a real job, that kind of thing is And it's understandable. Your parents want you to be viable and work. So having parents that supported that was very crucial. So my journey as an artist started there and developed from the literary part developed from storytelling. Actually, storytelling in this building in the 80s and the 90s. I started the children's hour of storytelling here, and that just grew into me wanting to do more storytelling. So I started writing a novel back in 1988 that became the second book in this deal. So don't give up. You never know. And this book started with a question for my dad. I wanted to know how men of his generation, born in 1921 in South Georgia, was able to be a leader in his home, his church, his community, on his job, everywhere except in the eyes of the government, that had actual laws and policies that treated him less than human. So I had that question going into this project, and then I saw an answer from James Baldwin that's in the front of the book. I'll let you read it once you buy the book. And
Well done.
Hint, hint.
and Baldwin helped me answer that question, but I went into it with the quest to know more. My dad had already, excuse me, gone to glory at that point, so I couldn't ask him. So I turned to fiction for an answer, and the peach seed is that answer.
And Linda, as mentioned, your first book was a memoir, so very intimate territory,
Yes.
dealing with family. But your latest, Breaking Through Your Own Glass Ceiling, I feel is more, if I'm kind of describing it, is more kind of self-help and career development or supporting people with from a very specific lens. So how did you go? I'm curious that journey from memoir, which is a whole different muscle, and then just kind of going into helping others basically.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, I resonate with so many things. Daughter of immigrants, father Mexico, mother Colombia. Yeah, writing was never anything that they thought was useful at all. I got my MFA, I think, in my late 40s, maybe. Yeah, so I think that, and the memoir, a lot of the memoir is the question about my father. Like, how could this father that I thought was so great have done things that were really difficult for me to understand? And so, I think that I loved all the threads in people's stories. Everything I do is about voice, right? And about my particular voice. And one of the things that one of my teachers said is, when you write the particulars of your life or whatever the particulars of your story or your poem or however you do it, that when you are talking about the particulars like burning the tortilla or, whatever it is, that is what makes it resonant to universally. And even though I have a very particular story about a very particular family, it resonates with people because it just triggers the authenticity for themselves and whatever their particular stories are. And in a way, I can see why you think it's a switch. And one of the things that another teacher said to me was that, particularly as people of color, that our work by definition will always be political on some level. And so he said, just write your stories, just write what comes out of you, because you will already have that embedded into it because of the world we live in. And so for me, as I was writing my books, I also have been a life coach for, probably over 25 years now, working predominantly with women, predominantly with people of color. And the themes were so often the same, and they were also, but even though they're very particular, the book is very particular, and it tells my story. So even though it's, I give all these examples from my life, I give examples from my coaches, the people I coach's lives, and I give examples from the world. And so for me, it's still a very personal book as well, where I share stories about myself and about the resonance and the things that so many of us as human beings. So even though it has a very particular audience, I know that anybody who reads it is going to be meaningful for them, because when we are authentic and honest and tell our stories, that is what people can feel and resonate with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to backtrack a little bit to you, Priscilla. Your poetry is very intimate, probing, and some might even say dark, just because you go to very brave territory depicting the oppressed and not only marginalized but militarized abuses. So I'm very curious, how do you navigate? I mean, that's got to be kind of hard for you doing it and observing it and then putting pen to paper and then, maybe the reaction you get to. But I'm just curious, how is that different? I have so much mad respect for poets.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for your question, and thank you for bringing us all here and for the support and the space for all of this. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just contextualize that this book came out of human rights work that I was doing. I was working with an organization called Defense for Children International Palestine, which is a local, Palestinian independent NGO in the West Bank that's primarily working to serve Palestinian children who've been arrested, whether by Israeli forces or by Palestinian forces, and has worked very hard to campaign and to bring forward that story. So I was, really in this sort of headspace of constantly going through documents, looking at military orders, looking at arrest experiences, speaking to children, and thinking about, how could we use these stories and these people's experiences in order to help advance more just rules, more just processes, and more awareness about what was happening to these arrested children. And so, the poetry chapbook was maybe the easier part of the work that I was doing at the time. So when you're sort of coming into it cold, on a beautiful day here, it may feel very, very heavy, but for me, it was a kind of therapy to handle the just devastating stories that I was reading. And, for example, like one boy that we worked with made this really beautiful film about his life. His name was Albeda. He had been arrested twice. And we were just trying to find a story that highlighted how hard it was to reintegrate into society after multiple arrests. He was shot later and killed. So for me, the book was a way to make sense of the experience and sort of process it in an artistic and more open form than in the human rights violation documentation.
And I'm assuming this was actually all pre what we're all
Yes. Yes.
dealing with now with the present genocide going on.
Yes. This was back in 2018 that I was working on this chapbook in the context of a solitary confinement report we were putting together, which was looking at all cases of children who had been put into solitary confinement before even being charged. So the solitary confinement was used as a way to coerce confessions. And, that report was completed and put out there if you are so interested in looking it up. It's a few years old now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I probably another one is coming out, right? Or are you in the midst of writing?
I think right now they're very busy working on the current events rather than on solitary confinement at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, for all of you in the road to getting published, obviously it's kind of a almost elite status to get published, right? Especially if you're talking about trying to get like the big 5 publishers. And then it's a whole different road to navigate if you decide to go hybrid or self-publish. But either way, it's typically dominated, the publishing world is dominated, it's a white dominated space, and then also the authors typically. So I'm just curious, since you've been doing this, what challenges have you noticed, and what changes, maybe positive changes along the way from when you started to 2024? And Margo, I see you're just itching. Go for it.
Give me the mic.
Well, my first book came out in like 2008 or 2009. It's the same, I'm going to just say it's the same bullshit is going on. It's the same now, and it's surprising to me how myopic it still is. The tokenism, the diminishing of what you're trying to do. They are trying to slot you into their preconceived notions. For instance, with this time around, and I've talked about this before, I already burned my bridge with my publisher, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell this story. The book, book title is The Neapolitan Sisters. It's about 3 sisters, right? So, there's a tie-in with that, and a very important tie-in in the actual book. So the day before I was due to turn in the final edits for my novel, I get an email from the PR marketing department saying that they have concerns about the title because somebody read the first page and realized, oh, she's Latina. Why is it called the Neapolitan Sisters? So they wanted me to change the title from the something to something else, sisters. So one of my favorite words is the F word. I said that so many times and very, very loud. And this is where I said, I cannot advocate for myself because I'm just going to curse them out. I stepped aside and I went to my agent at the time, and my editor also chimed in. And I said, I can't believe, and they put this in the email. So they literally are documenting the way they think. And I said to them, well, I can either call it the Neapolitan Sisters, I can call it the Chicharron Sisters, or I can call it the Chutzpah Sisters because I'm covering all my bases here. Surprisingly, they went with the Neapolitan Sisters, right?
Wow, shocker.
And I think that's the kind of stuff that we are still dealing with. But on the plus side, I have to say book clubs and book readers now are so much more out there and supportive. And to me, that gives me hope. I mean, we were talking about how little hope we have for in general. Book readers give me hope because they're very passionate and they will share the news about their novels. And I don't mind talking about this because I think it's a very important thing for people to know. The realities of publishing is just because your book is published doesn't mean your publisher cares about your book. A lot of it is left up to us authors who I spend a lot of time alone, and then I have to come out here and comb my hair and stuff. But readers make it worth it. There's still a lot of BS to deal with. Little by little, we'll chip away at it as long as people keep buying books. That's the most important thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely, definitely.
Yes.
And I think social media coupled with the book clubs and just readers, reading and reader support has done a lot.
It's been night and day from my first book to this book. And that's
Really?
because of readers.
Because of readers. Wow. Anita, I know you have interesting stories of things that you specifically wanted in your publishing journey. Like
Talking
with
about
the
that trailer.
editor and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, well, yes, I'm a baby author. Um, and coming on last August, the book came out August 1st, 2023. And I got my agent and my editor in 2021. So 2 years after getting them, the book came out. But it was a lot of luck. A lot of luck. I think it has to do with a lot of luck and persevering, not giving up. Um, but here I am sitting in very white Marin writing this book about South Georgia, my roots, very black. But that helped because my pining for that world helped me draw it out, I think. And so when the time came to query for an agent, an editor, and all of that, especially for the editor, I wanted a black woman editor. I had the audacity, with my estrogen and melanin here, to put that out in the universe. This is what I want. Ask for what you want and see if you get it. And I got Retha Powers, who is a black woman at Holt. I was very lucky because she and I could speak a shorthand. And we did. And I'm so grateful to her for her seat at that table and advocating for this book and others. And they listened. I had a very unique experience, I'm told from other authors. Yeah. I had input in the title, I had input in the cover. They were supportive of my ideas, and I felt very supported in that way. But it doesn't change the fact that a lot needs to still change because I'm going to be doing a festival where there are 20 authors. 15 of them are white, are men. 15 of them are men, 5 women. I'm the only black person. There's one other BIPOC woman. WTF? This is kind of ludicrous. I mean, at least half and half, women, men, if nothing else. So a lot of work still to be done. But I you say that, and then you say, I'm very grateful. Yes, I am for Rita Powers and the work she's doing and the work that others like her are doing and the work that you're doing, Paula.
Yes, give it up for Paula.
Please.
Yeah.
Paula, yes. And it's we just have to persevere and keep at it. And I had ideas about what I wanted to do. And a lot of it is up to authors. If you have a big dream for your book, your publisher will say, "Yes, go ahead. We support you in that." Not monetarily, but go ahead. We're going to support you in it. So my husband and I produced a book trailer for this book that we really, really wanted to do. And so we did it. And it's more like a movie trailer when people see it. It's very cinematic. I want you to see it. Please go to my website and see it. But I'm so glad we did because number one, it just made me feel good. That was in and of itself was enough. It was my therapy because this is a process that will kick your behind. So that trailer and all those so uplifting. And I still look at it and just feel good about the journey because the journey is hard and we have a lot of work to do still.
And we're all saying, because obviously they're all writers, authors. So obviously we're relating to how they navigate their professional and personal worlds and the publishing industry. But everything you're saying could apply to a lot of different industries. And I'm sure people in the audience could give their own testimony of, maybe women navigating other male dominated spaces or BIPOC people navigating predominantly white spaces. So would you all agree that, and obviously all of you have done other things, journalism, teaching, so what you're saying translates to other, and no better person on the panel to talk to about that than Linda. So go take it away. I know you want to say something about all that.
I do. One of the things I tell everybody is that you should do what you love because no matter what field you're in, no matter what industry, no matter what job you have, you are going to have to deal with inequities. And either you're going to have to use your privilege to try to change them, or you are going to have to address them every day and have to figure out what to do in each moment. And so you got to try to do what you care about, and that will sustain you, because otherwise it's I get bitter. I just do, because I work with these amazing people. People talk about your waitressing job because, yes, earning a living as an author is, you could see my royalty things. And sometimes they're like, yeah, we'll just send it to you next year when there's just a little bit more. So when it's over $1. So, you don't do this, to get a lot of money. You do it because it's your passion, it's your therapy, it's what gives meaning to your life, to your family's life, to the world, right? Like you're driven to do it in many ways because, as you said, it is such a difficult. Nobody can write it but you, except for people who have a lot of money and then they hire the ghostwriters, right? But we are not that group of people, and we wouldn't want to be, because we want to write the books. And so I just say, very little has changed in any industry. The book industry represents, most industries out there, and I work with a lot of people who are in organizations led by women, led by people of color, and they are still dealing with the same issues because there are so many dynamics of inequity that are not just about gender or race, right? We were talking about the whole, probably many of you have seen the movie Origin or read Caste. And so trying to unearth now, as someone who's done equity work for over 30 years, like trying to sort through caste now, I'm like, wow, there's always, another lens to try to see, can we possibly break through? And I think I was talking to a friend yesterday about that. And, in my, I don't really live in hope. I do what I do because I just want to live that life. I'm not hopeful about the industry. I certainly felt pigeonholed. In my book, I was very clear. My memoir didn't follow the traditional Latina story, and that it was not going to. And I didn't get a publisher. I ended up, publishing as a hybrid, but I was very clear that they were looking for a particular kind of story. And my story, there was no one that was. People did cross the border, my parents, but they didn't do it in the difficult ways that a lot of people did. There wasn't anybody who was on a gang or, woke anybody up at night. It was a story that was different in that way. And I was very clear that there was no market for a different kind of story.
no market to them, but obviously we know
Yes.
people need to hear all sorts of stories,
Yes.
right? So I'm glad you persevered and
I
it's
am
out
too.
there in the world. Everybody who's up here, I think everybody who's up here, I can proudly say they're not only talented writers, but also very much, as I mentioned in the intro, agents of change, whether it's in their world or out to the world. And I'd love for you to speak about how important it is for women to tell their stories, not only as far as pen to paper, but also stories for your community and society out in the world, especially during times like this where we've got, I mean, 2024 is packed with a lot of challenges socially and politically. We could just narrow down talking about women's issues. Who, first of all, would any of you have thought in this last year that we would have seen Roe overturned? And that's a whole other thing. And I know all of them are very active in certain ways and getting their voices uplifted and helping their communities. Anita, I know definitely has started. Gosh, was it in 2018 or 2020?
2020.
2020, voting rights advocacy. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. And that was specifically geared not to here. We're kind of in a bubble out in Northern California. This is for Georgia. Can you tell us about that, how you got involved in it, and the goals and what you accomplished?
Yes, Anita's Peach Corps was formed.
Yeah.
The peach seed, Anita's peach corn.
I just couldn't believe how good that was. Um, yeah, name. Warnock and Ossoff. You remember when we were Warnocking our Ossoff off to get them in. Um, because Georgia was on everybody's mind. That's just the truth.
Oh, she's good. She's good.
Okay, I really wasn't trying that time. That was just the truth. Georgia was on everybody's mind. And it's hard to even remember. I contacted a friend who had worked with Obama's campaign. She was in Texas and she reminded me that I had met her before. And we were talking on the phone. And I said, I really want to do something. I have a lot of friends here who want to help with the Georgia effort. And I found a Democratic group in Georgia that we could work with in Southwest Georgia, my home. So people were very interested in a campaign that was targeting that part of the country. That you can write postcards, to a lot of places, but this was almost personal for folks. I want to go right into Southwest Georgia and help. So we just launched it and started. We wrote 5,000 postcards to Southwest Georgia, and that part of the country, and that part of the state even, people were neglected. Nobody was knocking on doors or sending them postcards or even caring about their vote. So they were interested in getting postcards. And we were very grateful and interested in sending them. So we did that in 2020. And then again, we did 10,000, 2 years ago?
2 years ago. Yep.
We upped the ante, and we're getting ready to do more now. I don't know how, but we're going to do more now. So in that same area of the country, because it worked, those folks got out, and we turned Georgia blue for that, and we're going to keep it blue. So that was that's how that happened. And I was really, really grateful to people who helped, and they were grateful
To be able to.
to be able to
That's
help.
right.
So it was such a beautiful win-win situation because folks, they cared and they really wanted to do something that made a difference and that they could feel the difference. And that's what happened. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, definitely. Priscilla, the obvious, and you've talked a little bit about it already. What are you still involved with, and how is your writing kind of translating to your activism?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm definitely in a time where I'm almost asking myself that question because I'm allowing poetry to take up more space in my life. And you asking, is this as valid or as important or as useful as something that looks more like direct services? And how do we find, you know, how do we find answers to questions that have to do with the human spirit and not only to do with the human body? Like they're always going to be connected, but you know, if we take care of a person in Gaza today, how do we prevent the next bomb from being dropped tomorrow, right? These are two separate problems. And that has to do with spirit. What do people believe about the humanity of people in Gaza? What do people believe about how capable they are of reaching out to their member of Congress and speaking out, and how much fear is around that, how much stigma is around that, and why do we think of issues of women as separate from all of that, right? Like, because for a woman in Gaza today, you know, what's at stake is just everything. It's her whole life, it's her children, it's her future, it's her past, it's her memory, it's everything. And why you know, it's just so important for our feminist spaces to be intersectional. Otherwise, these questions just don't come up, right? The conversation might stay completely focused on other kinds of concerns, you know, like maybe only about books and not also about the body. So how do we constantly link these? I'm still working through these impossible questions, but I know that for myself, every time I have the courage to write something that's true, it's more transformational than I expect. For me, for people around me who are also living in a state of fear, or hiding their identity. And there is so much that all oppressed people's narratives have in common. And so it's empowering much beyond your own experience, your own identity. And so, yeah, I think there's something mysterious there, and yet it's clear that it matters and it's important, and I continue.
Yeah, yeah. And Linda, before I kind of wrap this part of it up, my marching buddy, I like to call her my marching buddy. So I know you're out there too, and you use your writing and your creativity as activism, but you also use your physical body and your voice for it. So would you like to say more about that or inspire other people?
Yeah, I loved what you said about the spirit. I've been thinking a lot about how so much of this is spiritual work in a way. We don't think of writing or protesting as spiritual work, and yet we are, you know, fighting for our humanity and for everyone's humanity in that regard. Anything that you do every single day, there is always an opportunity to recognize first your own humanity. That is a lot of work right there. And I think the writers help do that. Like I said, the more personal, the more authentic our writing, the more that we will touch people, because you know we are my Buddhist teacher used to talk about warm hand to warm hand, and you know, like that, when your books are from your heart and your warmth and your authenticity, then that is how you heal the world. That is how you recognize your own humanity, and therefore you are recognizing other people's humanity, or you're inviting them to. You know, I mean, we can't make anybody do everything, but I know that when I read, that is what the books and the words do for me. When I am on a march with Paula, the words that people are saying there and the connectedness, that also heals and inspires my spirit. So I think that as you said, that, you know, body, mind, and spirit are very interconnected, and it is a mystery. And I think writers are the people that we talked about that a little, we're willing to go to those places.
And Margo, I don't want to leave you. If you anything to that you want to speak, if you.
Well, I think with the Neapolitan sisters, since I did have that 10-year gap and I lived a couple lifetimes between books, I was much ready to not. It's not that I wanted to piss people off, but I wasn't afraid to piss people off. So I told a story about things that are not spoken about in the Latino community. They're very loud whispers, but they're not spoken about. I wrote about 3 characters who are very complicated women, very difficult women at points. I wrote about pleasure for the sake of pleasure, you know, through sex. I wrote about a mean Mexican mommy. And the one thing that you don't do in the Latino culture is you don't talk smack about your Mexican mommy. So you know, it's not my mom, right? Because I still talk to my mom. I was ready to do that. I was ready to kind of blow the lid off of it without hitting the reader over the head with what went wrong with these three sisters. I went there thinking, I'm going to trust my reader. I'm going to have enough respect for my reader so that they can figure it out without me laying it out. And I wasn't going to tell the typical Latina story. There are no tamales in my book. There are no tortillas. There's a lot of dysfunctional love in it. And it was very different. And I think that's where you have to have an editor who understands you. And Toni Kirkpatrick is Latina, and she understood it, and she was actively seeking. She resonated with the book more than I did, and I wrote it. And so and then I asked her for like, I need some weeks to just kind of get it up to speed. And thanks to her, and I think one of the things about publishing, word gets around. Being a decent person counts for a lot. Making your deadlines, trying your hardest, being a good author isn't just about writing a book. It is about being a good team player. I wrote the book. I'm the one that's sitting here, but there is a lot of people, even, with my publisher who, I have whatever relationship with. I really do admire and respect the work that they're doing because it's not easy work. So I think all of those things came into play. You have to pick where you're going to amplify your voice. And for me, as a Latina with a commercial voice, I'm treading kind of a gray area. And I've been so heartened that people understand what I'm trying to do. That they get the darkness behind the joke, which is a cultural thing. And I am looking forward to doing it again and again and again until I can't type anymore.
Awesome. So let me ask the audience this. Obviously, I promised our online audience and our in-person audience that you will have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. But before we do that, would you like each of our authors to read a little bit from each of their books? Yep. Okay, we're doing it. They're all prepared. Who
I
wants?
have get it overitis. Can I get it over?
Yes, I think
Go for it.
I think
Yes.
this is a nice flow, actually.
Yes.
All right. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I like actually hearing authors read, so that I don't like doing it. It's just, whatever, get over it. All right. This is from chapter 31, and my book features three sisters that come back to their parents' house in Boyle Heights for their youngest sister's wedding. They've been apart for many years for many reasons. So it's the oldest sister is Dulcina. She was in San Francisco for 10 years. The middle sister is Claudia, and then the youngest sister who's getting married is Maritza. And they're sitting at the parents' table while Maritza goes through her wedding planning. And she's going through a spreadsheet she made with all her guests. So here is Dulcina. I thought Mrs. Flores was dead. We should be so lucky, Claudia snorts. Oh, don't look at me like that, Maritza. There are plenty of better reasons of why I'm going to burn in hell. And most of them I've done at least twice, including butt stuff, both ways. Maritza's expression is equal parts displeased and confused by her sister's raunchiness. Poor sweet bunny. She doesn't know what she's missing. It's probably why she's okay with marrying Agostino. She's never had any better to miss. It's her husband who died, Maritza says after giving Claudia one last dirty look. It's why she had to move to Huntington Park to live with her son. I can guess the answer, but I still ask. Moses or El Dorky? El Dorky, both Maritza and Claudia answer. Maritza doesn't call jinx. She's still annoyed with Claudia, and Claudia can't double jinx Maritza without voiding her original jinx. If she were to call it, the next time Maritza jinxes her, it'll count for twice the amount of time. Technically, Maritza's leaving both her and Claudia open to my third-party jinx, but I'll let it slide this one time. He's divorced, but he still takes communion at Mass, Maritza says with a judgmental tone. He's not supposed to. If that's the worst thing he's doing, then he's doing okay, Claudia shrugs. Unlike his brother. Moses is in prison, Maritza tells me, as if this piece of gossip is so expected it's not even worth sharing. Manslaughter or murder, one of those, and he's never getting out. Neither of them had a chance with a mother like Mrs. Flores, I say, just as casually, even as I ignore the sudden sour taste in my mouth. They were both doomed from the start. Yeah, well, it's not like we got to pick our mother either, Claudia says. She drops this bomb so matter-of-factly, I almost want to slow clap her. Maritza definitely wants to slap her. Honestly, Claudia probably deserves both.
That was wonderful. Thank you for getting over your get it overitis and sharing that with us. This poem is called White Kia. As I said, it comes directly out of the work I was doing. One of the voices in this poem comes from a former child prisoner who was arrested by a plainclothes Israeli soldier in a not typical way and was put in the trunk of a car. The other voice is mine. White Kia. What happened to me was a mouth. White Kia pulled over. Inside a wave curl, a common gnaw. Kidnapped us without saying a word. My ribs' prayer in its cavity. Had their handguns, bowels of clam and merman. Threw us into the trunk. Sink all bubbles into the illustration. Felt my body was breaking. The list of unknowns long. They took us. Like lanternfish that dark away with their tiny lights. A mattress that had not seen the sun. Each day my commune with the whale refused me water. Its wants appear forays of sudden color. Just because I called Abu Amir a rat. We ask what we are in common denominators. My friends who confessed against me. What of us?
So I will read from chapter 1 of The Peach Seed, and we will meet Fletcher Dukes, one of our protagonists, and his sister, Olga. Fletcher's almost 70, Olga's 88 and losing her sight. And in this scene, Fletcher walks past a moment at the Piggly Wiggly. Y'all know about Piggly Wiggly? I'm surprised at how many people do. I thought my book would introduce people to Piggly Wiggly. They go there for their weekly grocery shopping, and they're going to walk past a woman that from Fletcher's past. He smells her perfume first. She's wearing a perfume he can't name, but he remembers. You know how that is. You smell this perfume and it takes you back. So that's what happened. He walked past this woman, smelled the perfume, but didn't say anything to Olga or the woman. If only he could glimpse the woman's hands. He was sure he'd see matching medicine knot tattoos beneath each wrist, because Altavis was part Muskogee Creek. She rounded the corner. He was at the checkout watching for her. She rounded the corner, pushing her cart away from him. He took a few steps back, needing to see her walk to confirm what he already knew. "I'll be damned," he whispered. Like watching a scene from a favorite movie, he smiled at her long strides, slightly slewfoot. He was only 4 months older, but he seemed like a relic by comparison. His granddaughters would say that Altavis was fierce in her crisp white oversized shirt. Her denim legs vanished behind a Coke display, and Fletcher flashed on walking hand in hand with her with a giant teddy bear when they were in high school at Dougherty County's fair. If only Olga knew how close they both stood at that moment to their very own Altavis. As they fastened seatbelts, Olga said, "Well, that doesn't happen every day." "What you mean?" Fletcher said. "Estee Lauder, youth do. I smelled it in the store on somebody." That's an old-timey perfume. Was everywhere in the 50s and the 60s, but you don't smell it that much anymore. Fletcher stared ahead at Michigan license plates that now took on a completely different meaning. He couldn't explain why he didn't mention Altavis as he drove Olga home. Later, he would look down through the backbone of this day in search of signs that he had missed. And he would recognize that red Volvo wagon as the calm before a storm called Altavis Benson, walking around his Piggly Wiggly after 52 years.
And so it begins.
And so it begins. I listened to your book on tape, so that's very fun to.
Anita narrates her
Yes.
book.
Yes. All right. The glasses must emerge. Thank you, team player.
No charge.
All right. So even though I live with bitter and I don't have no hope, I am gonna I'm gonna share the last piece. The book has different chapters.
Maybe we should have ended with someone else.
No, the last chapter is called Aspire to be Your Brand of Happy. Yeah. And remember, it's breaking through your own glass ceilings as context. None of your ceilings are bulletproof. They feel like it, but as you work with the practices in this book, they can be as fine as spun sugar. Consistent tapping may suffice. You don't have to work so hard doing what will give you no true relief. If you've gotten anything out of these words of mine, remember the power of tap, tap, tap. Each glass ceiling that cracks will send spiderweb cracks to others and theirs to you. Just remember that demanding perfection of yourself and others is the strongest enemy of joy. Every chapter is a puzzle piece of what nurtures happiness. Each moment of love and compassion you grant to yourself flows into the next until it is no longer a constant conscious effort. It is the life of loving your authentic self. Your brand of happiness is strengthened by the discipline of daily commitments. It requires a mindset of prosperity to live a full-hearted life as you claim and use whatever privilege you possess to further equity. While greed, hatred, and delusion will constantly distract your heart, by the same token, generosity, love, and truth keeps you strong. Scarcity behaviors will naturally ebb because you give them less and less attention while building your power and your voice. The question that underlies authentic happiness is, where can I do the most good and experience the most joy for myself and others? And you are always part of the equation. Make no mistake, claiming your full-hearted self is not a quick fix. What keeps me going, and I hope will keep you going, is knowing that as I break through my glass ceilings with happiness, I inspire others to do the same. You find your cracks are interconnected across minds, hearts, and spirits. Your efforts free others, and their efforts free you to be your best self.
Look at you being positive and inspiring. Love it. So I do want to open it up for questions. And I actually am going to have to jump out there to get you guys on so our YouTube people can hear the questions. Who's first? Oh, first is someone online. This sounds, I don't know who they're talking about.
I think it was a discussion about the publishing.
Oh, yes, probably Margo, definitely. This sounds a lot like the film American Fiction. Yeah, it does.
It wasn't fiction, okay? I got it. It's very interesting. I think we talk about it amongst ourselves. I'm always happy to talk to people who are interested in publishing to tell them the realities of publishing. It is incredibly hard to get published. I wasn't supposed to get published, and I've been published 5 times. I am very grateful for it, but I do work very hard at what I do. I haven't seen American Fiction yet because I think it's too close to home.
You should do it.
Yeah,
Do it.
I talk a lot of crap and I make fun of it, but it's a difficult industry. It's a difficult way to make money. You don't make money in publishing unless you're making money. And there are a lot of people who still are working very hard to open it up for all voices. And those are the people who I want to get behind, and I do my part for my fellow authors.
Yeah. But that was a good comment, and I actually had that thought as you were talking, as all of you were talking. It did remind me of that. Do we have any other questions online, Jonathan? Okay, and over here.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful to listen to you and to hear your voices through your work. First thing I wanted to say is to Anita, you probably already know this, but if you don't, you should tell your marketer at Holt that this year, 2024, the Pantone color of the year is peach fuzz
Oh my gosh.
for all the fashion world in New York. So just tell them that. They can work with
Thank
that.
you.
So the question I have is really about, it's interesting that the first question was about American fiction, which is up for an Oscar nomination tomorrow. But also there are a couple of short films that are really fantastic as well, one of which is called The ABCs of Book Banning. If you have not seen that movie, you should see that. It's really poignant, especially in this time where we are living in a time where truth is being attacked and authenticity is being denigrated. And if you look at where we are in a lot of the states, particularly in, for example, Florida, where books that I and a lot of us went through school reading have been basically banished or banned. The question I have is, I'd like to hear your thoughts about that and how coming to a place like Marin, it's easy sort of preaching to the converted here, but how do we speak to those people who feel that truth needs to be attacked, truth needs to be denied, and most importantly, history needs to be forgotten, obliterated, and never spoken of?
Who wants to take that? Or were you anybody? Who wants to take that?
I
Anita.
would say not to take it all, but to just say that being from Georgia and loving the good parts of Georgia, I find a lot of solace in the fact that there are a lot of good people in that state doing good things, like the Georgia Center for the Book. And this is not just because they put my book on that list of books all Georgians should read, but they did for 2024, and I'm glad. But organizations such as that are fighting against all of this banning, and these quiet moments like that are happening, and it's a good thing, and I'm so grateful for it. But the rest of it, it makes you sick. It just makes you sick to think about the efforts that people are going to tear down librarians, teachers. But we just have to get behind the folk that are doing the good work and keep pushing.
And most of the books that are on banned lists are marginalized groups, authors, BIPOC, but also LGBTQ. So that's interesting. Anybody else on the panel want to address banned books?
Yeah, I mean, it connects so much to my own question for myself when I'm like, is poetry enough? Is writing enough? And then you see how afraid people are of us saying what's true, right? That there is something really, there is power there, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be legislators working at attacking librarians, right? I mean, did people who became librarians think of themselves when they were studying library science as doing something that was at the front line of protecting democracy? Probably not at the time. I mean, maybe they understood, but that's kind of where we are. And it also goes to show how kind of, in your reading where you talked about how the cracks, these little tiny positive things like coming here today, buying a book here to support this good bookstore does something, right? Helps create more and more proof of who we are, who we want to be. And I think we just have to keep doing that as much as we can. I know that sounds too simple, and yet your taps are speaking to me right now too. The tiny actions we all can take that add up.
Yeah, and I would just say there's plenty to do, right? And so find what gives you some sense of voice and power and some sense of solidarity and community, because the isolation is part of is how they break us apart, and they make us think we're different and that we aren't connected to all our humanity is not connected to each other. And I would also say that part of the problem with this country in particular is has never really faced up to its history from the very beginning, where it says all men are created equal. And I was like, really? Okay, no women, no enslaved people, like no immigrants, so, we have a lot of work to do in this country. And I think part of it is talk about origin. The origin story in this country's got to change before we can't change it unless we admit that the original origin story doesn't make any sense of coming here and what was happened to indigenous people. And, so I think that we first have to really tell the truth in this country before we can then do something different about it.
Any other questions from the audience in the back? You have to get it on the mic.
Hey, Margo, big fan. Congratulations on your book. They're wonderful.
Thank you.
You talked about American fiction, and I was wondering, you were probably in the thick of it and thinking about with the American Dirt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to know kind of what your whole take on that was. If you think it led in a good direction, was it more positive, more negative? I'm sure you had a lot of mixed emotions about it, but it'd be
I have
I'd love to
opinions.
know what you think. Yeah, I'd love to know what your opinions are on it. Yeah.
Could you, before you answer that, could you, for those who maybe are not familiar with it and don't get too into the weeds, but explain to them what she means by the controversy over American Dirt, which was a book that came out in early 2020.
It was a book written that featured a Latina protagonist coming over, fleeing a drug cartel with her son. And the woman who wrote it got a pass. Honestly, she was not Latina, so she was writing a book, a very specific book about a very specific experience, and she is white. And a lot of people had a lot of things to say about it. I spoke privately with my own author friends. Primarily, we're all Latino authors that we sit around and have these little conversations with. Some people were on this side and some people were on the other side. I was on the side. I'm not surprised it happened.
Yeah.
That was what I was. I was not because it's a very small club. And who they let sit at the table is who they find entertaining, who they're not threatened by, who amuses them, right? I'm a hard worker, but I am nobody's shiny penny. And when that happened, there was a lot of talk about the opportunities it took away from real Latina authors or Latina authors on both, men and women. And it's going to keep happening, and it's happened again and again and again. And I don't know what to do. I'm a commercial fiction writer. I write commercial fiction. I don't write literary fiction. So I'm even in a subcategory when it comes to authors. I think when it comes down to that, you just have to be very clear where you stand on the issue. I would never, I think it's hard enough to make a living as an author. It's hard enough to make an impression. That's not the kind of impression I would have wanted to make. So I didn't read the book, and I'm still trying to figure out how to manage my expectations as to what success means for me as an author and as a Latina author.
And I remember one good thing that came out of that controversy was Dignidad Literari. So I don't know if you or Linda are familiar with that organization.
I mean, no. I mean, I've obviously heard about it. I mean, I think good things come out of every struggle, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the piece that we talked about, that when there is, unfortunately, bad things have to happen before enough good people rise up and say, we want to do something different, And so I think that good things came out of it. I think conversations were had. Mm-hmm. The question of why does this person get a really good book deal and I didn't? No, just kidding. But the piece of it is, and it doesn't mean that people can't write about people who are not their, specific race, ethnicity, any kind of, right? Like that's not the answer. The answer is just how it highlighted so many things that are still problematic in the publishing world about who makes the decisions and who they elevate and who they choose not to, and I think that's going to carry on.
Any other questions? Delilah.
Hi, my question's for Linda, if I'm not mistaken. When you were writing your book, breaking through your own glass ceilings, what was one of like the key points that like brought you to making that book and publishing it? Because it's something scary, especially for a Latina, and especially in today's society where we're marginalized and we're not seen as important as other groups. So what was that like motivation or that thing that just kept you going through it all? Because I'm assuming that you found yourself struggling when you were writing it, trying to publish it and getting it out there. Instead of giving up, you kept going and now you have it out there. So what was that key motivating thing for you?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I will say one is the fabulous author Daisy Hernandez, who I had been a friend of, and she was my teacher, and I coached her, so we have multiple relationships. And she just said to me one day, "When are you going to write that book?" And I went, "What book?" And she goes, "That book about everything you know." And so, sometimes we need that. We need, like, I think you talked about the readers. We also need the pre-readers, right? We need the people who say, "I want to read that book." And you need to write it, right? And I think so that was really that really was the push. I think the other thing is, as I said, I coached a lot of women of color over the years, and I was having the same conversations, and I am still having the same conversations. But now I have the book that I mail them as part of my coaching package, and I'll say, okay, you need to read chapter 14. Because it sort of deepens it gives me the opportunity to support the women that way, and because I just constantly got feedback. I actually, fun fact, I joined Toastmasters in Marin as a structure to write this book. And so I would, I had an idea about a chapter, and I would create a 6 to 8 minute speech on it, and then I would give the speech at the Toastmasters Club, and I got so much positive feedback. So I think one of the things is we need each other, and we need people and we can't be afraid to put our words out and to hear people say, "Oh, that matters to me. I want that. That is helpful." We never can do it alone. We don't write words, and we might be isolated when we write them, but we are always thinking, in my mind, when I always tell people that I meet, I go, "I wrote this for you," and it's a lovely thing for people who don't feel like a lot of books are written for them to hear, you were my audience. You were who I wrote this for.
All right, I know we got to wind things up, so I'm going to ask a quick question, and by quick, I mean your answer is going to be quick. Yeah, not necessarily the question, but I'd love to know from writers, and especially women writers, who are your literary ancestors, and or who are the writers that influenced your writing or influenced and or your life? Anita, I'll start with you.
Okay. Octavia Butler.
Oh, yes.
And of course, Baldwin, Hurston, Walker, but also more current. Did you read the book Girl, Woman, Other?
Yes.
Evarista? No,
It was
Bernadine.
Bernadine
Evarista. Yes, I that was a very, very encouraging book because of her style, the style in the book, the way she wrote it. No, it was no punctuation. Wasn't it?
Yeah,
Something
that's
like
right. No, yeah.
Yeah, and once you got into the rhythm of it, you got it. But I also turned to poetry a lot because I am so in awe of the poet showing us how to do more with less, which a novelist can really benefit from, apparently. So Nikki Finney, check out a book called Head Off and Split. She won the National Book Award in 2011 or 2012, I think, and she did her acceptance speech. You must go home to YouTube and watch Nikki Finney. You start typing in Nikki Finney acceptance speech, and it'll finish it for you because it's just that good. It is an event in and of itself, her acceptance speech. So those are some that I would bring up.
Margo.
I worship at the altar of Ann Tyler. She writes extraordinary novels about ordinary people, and that's what I write about people who would never have a book written about them. So Ann Tyler, for me, she's my touchstone.
Priscilla.
It's kind of a cliche answer for a Palestinian poet, but Naomi Shihab Nye is hard to beat. So formative, and also one of the only, Arab Americans that was on the bookshelf back in the days of Borders. And not just her writing, but her in real life. I mean, she is just she's just walking love. I mean, I can't even tell you, if you mention her name among any group of poets, people have so many real stories of her kindness. And then a shout out for a novel right now. Susan Muadzi Daraj's new book is just out. Behind You is a Sea. I just got my copy and I can't wait to start reading that.
Linda.
Oof. Okay, not to be repetitive, I will say, I was thinking about this because you asked me that question in our IG Live. Louise Erdrich, love her books. Alice Walker for sure. And actually Isabel Allende, who I see over there, again, at the beginning of time, that she was one of the few Latinas who was consistently getting published. And so she was definitely important to me. And bell hooks for sure, and Sandra Cisneros, same thing. That again, at the beginning of time when we were reading, there wasn't much out there, so she was definitely an important first voice. And we have, I could go on and on and on, but I will stop right now.
And I will just put it out there too, Toni Morrison.
Yes.
For so many reasons. With that, I want all of you to consider this. You just talked about maybe your literary ancestors or just writers who influence your work. Someday, there are going to be younger versions of you up on this stage and in independent bookstores, and they're going to be naming you. Right? Yeah. With that, thank you. And thank you to our online audience. If you just kind of click below the title here, you can buy all their books. We make it very simple to click away, so please do that. But thank you for joining us online. Thank you for the audience here. You guys have been great. We just feel your energy and your support, and we're really going to feel it when you run to the registers and get their books. They will all be available to sign and answer any other questions maybe we couldn't get to. But thank you for coming out. Thank you for supporting them and for supporting Book Pass.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Paula.